In the shadow-drenched halls of Ansbach, a young girl named Caroline discovers that knowledge is the only true sovereignty. Born into the minor German nobility in 1683, her early years are marked by the flickering light of candles and the heavy scent of old parchment. Orphaned and isolated, she seeks refuge not in the games of children, but in the dense texts of philosophy and science. This intellectual hunger would eventually define the Enlightenment age. Even as a child, Caroline possesses a gravity that sets her apart from her peers, her sharp eyes scanning maps of a Europe soon to be reshaped by her influence. The loss of her father, the Margrave of Brandenburg-Ansbach, followed by the death of her mother, leaves Caroline adrift in a world of cold political alliances. She is moved to the court of Berlin, a place of high intellect and higher stakes. Under the guardianship of the King and Queen of Prussia, her potential begins to blossom. She is no longer just an orphan, she is a student of the world. The Berlin court provides a backdrop of stark elegance where the young Caroline learns that survival in the royal houses of Europe requires a mind as sharp as any blade. At the court of Queen Sophia Charlotte of Prussia, Caroline finds a mentor. Known as the Republican Queen, Sophia Charlotte introduces Caroline to the greatest minds of the era, including the philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. In the hushed galleries of Berlin, they discuss the nature of the soul and the mechanics of the universe. Caroline becomes the Queen's favorite pupil, absorbing the radical idea that a woman's intellect is equal to any man's. This period of intense study prepares her for the complex political maneuvers that will define her future in the British royal court. The time for marriage arrives, and Caroline is courted by the future Holy Roman Emperor, Archduke Charles. However, the price of a crown is her Protestant faith. In a move that shocks the Catholic powers of Europe, Caroline refuses the match, choosing her conscience over an imperial title. This decision catches the attention of the House of Hanover. George Augustus, the electoral prince, is sent to court her in secret. He travels in disguise to catch a glimpse of the woman whose intellect and beauty are whispered about in every court from Berlin to London. In 1705, Caroline marries George Augustus of Hanover. The union is not merely a political contract, but a meeting of two vastly different temperaments. While George is a soldier at heart, focused on military precision and rigid etiquette, Caroline is the intellectual engine of the couple. She moves to Hanover, navigating the complexities of a court that is increasingly likely to inherit the British throne. She begins to master the English language and the intricacies of British law, preparing herself for a role that will span across the North Sea into the heart of London. As Queen Anne's health fades in England, the tension in Hanover reaches a breaking point. The Act of Settlement has placed the Hanoverians next in line, but the transition is fraught with peril. Caroline watches as her father-in-law, the future George I, prepares to take a throne in a land he neither likes nor understands. She realizes that the success of the Hanoverian dynasty will depend on her ability to charm the British public and manage the volatile politics of the Whigs and Tories. The mystery of the British crown looms large over the cold Hanoverian nights. The year is 1714. Queen Anne is dead, and the Hanoverians arrive in a rain-slicked London. The reception is chilly. The English view their new German rulers with deep suspicion. Caroline, now Princess of Wales, steps onto British soil with a calculated grace. She understands that she must become more English than the English themselves. While her husband and father-in-law struggle with the language and the customs, Caroline begins to build a court that will serve as a bridge between the old world of the Stuarts and the new age of the Enlightenment. As the court of George I becomes a place of dour austerity and German favorites, Caroline and George Augustus established their own rival court at Leicester House. It becomes a beacon for intellectuals, poets, and politicians. This Court of the Sun is where Caroline shines, hosting salons that discuss everything from the physics of Isaac Newton to the poetry of Alexander Pope. She is the true power behind the Princess of Wales title, carefully cultivating a circle of allies who see her as the intellectual savior of the British monarchy. The relationship between King George I and his son deteriorates into open hostility. The king, jealous of his son's popularity, eventually banishes the Prince and Princess of Wales from St. James's Palace. Caroline finds herself at the center of a bitter dynastic feud. She must play a dangerous game, mediating between a vengeful father-in-law and a hot-tempered husband. In the shadows of this family war, she uses her political acumen to ensure that their claim to the throne remains secure, even as the royal family is torn apart by scandal and resentment. Even amidst political turmoil, Caroline's devotion to the mind never wavers. She orchestrates one of the most famous intellectual exchanges in history, the Leibniz-Clark correspondence. Acting as a facilitator, she manages the debate between her old friend Leibniz and Samuel Clarke, a deputy for Isaac Newton. They argue over the nature of space, time, and God's role in the universe. Caroline reads every letter, her intellect sharp enough to navigate the most complex theological and scientific problems of the 18th century, cementing her status as the intellectual queen. While Leibniz pushes the boundaries of metaphysics, the aging Sir Isaac Newton watches from the shadows of his London study. Though he communicates through Samuel Clarke, his presence looms over the correspondence like a silent titan. Caroline recognizes that this is more than a petty academic rivalry. It is a battle for the soul of the Enlightenment. She balances the egos of these giants, translating their complex theories into the language of statecraft. In her chambers, the scent of fresh ink and drying parchment lingers as she meticulously archives their letters, knowing they represent the pinnacle of human reason in a divided age. In 1714, the Hanoverian transition reaches its climax. Queen Anne is dead, and George I ascends the throne, bringing Caroline to London as the Princess of Wales. The British court is a den of wolves, skeptical of their new German-speaking rulers. Caroline, however, is prepared. Unlike her father-in-law, who remains distant and cold, she masters the English tongue and the intricate dances of British etiquette. She becomes the face of the dynasty, a bridge between the foreign House of Hanover and the wary English aristocracy, using her charm as a shield against the brewing political storms of the capital. The relationship between George I and his son, George Augustus, deteriorates into open hostility. The king's resentment of his heir creates a fractured court, and Caroline finds herself caught in the middle of a dynastic war. As the king's temper flares in the corridors of St. James's Palace, Caroline remains the stabilizing force. She navigates the king's paranoia while supporting her husband's ambitions. In private, she laments the cruelty of the royal rift, yet publicly, she maintains an air of impenetrable dignity, ensuring that the legitimacy of the Hanoverian line is never questioned by the public eye. Banished from the king's residence after a public falling out, Caroline and George Augustus established their own rival court at Leicester House. It quickly becomes the cultural heart of London. While the king's court is seen as dull and foreign, Caroline's salon is vibrant, filled with poets, scientists, and Whig politicians. She cultivates an opposition court that is more English than the king's own. Here, she is the true sovereign of intellect, hosting debates that challenge the status quo. Leicester House becomes a beacon of the Enlightenment, where the future of Britain is debated over candlelit dinners. Among the visitors to Leicester House, is Sir Robert Walpole, a man whose political cunning matches Caroline's intellectual depth. They recognize in each other a shared pragmatism. While George Augustus is often driven by pride and impulse, Caroline sees the value in Walpole's steady hand and financial brilliance. They form a secret, formidable alliance. Behind closed doors, they map out the future of the British Empire, deciding which ministers to elevate and which to ruin. It is a partnership of necessity and mutual respect, one that will define the political landscape of the nation for decades to come. Caroline's influence extends into the realm of the arts, where she becomes a vital patron for the likes of Voltaire and Handel. She understands that a queen's power is not just in policy, but in the cultural legacy she leaves behind. Voltaire, fleeing censorship in France, finds a sympathetic ear in Caroline. She encourages his writings on religious tolerance, seeing them as essential to a modern Britain. Meanwhile, the soaring compositions of Handel provide the soundtrack to her reign. To Caroline, the arts are the ultimate expression of a civilized society, and she wields them to soften the image of the monarchy. In June 1727, news arrives from Germany that George I has died of a stroke while traveling to Hanover. The transition of power is sudden and fraught with tension. A messenger arrives at Richmond Lodge in the dead of night, his boots caked in mud. Caroline is the first to receive the news, waking her husband to tell him that he is now King George II. The weight of the crown now rests upon them both. In this moment of profound change, Caroline knows her role must shift from a princess in opposition to a queen who must rule through her husband. The coronation of George II and Queen Caroline is a spectacle of unprecedented grandeur. Despite the king's reputation for frugality, Caroline insists on a display that commands respect. She walks down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, her gown heavy with jewels, many of them borrowed to mask the family's relative lack of personal wealth. As the crown is placed upon her head, she is not merely a consort, she is a partner in power. The ceremony cements her status in the eyes of the British people, a queen who possesses the grace of a royal and the mind of a philosopher. Ruling with George II requires a delicate touch. The king is prone to outbursts of temper and is fiercely protective of his own authority. Caroline masters the art of the backdoor influence. She allows him to believe that every policy, every ministerial appointment, and every diplomatic maneuver is his own idea. Behind the scenes, she works tirelessly with Walpole to ensure the stability of the nation. She manages the king's moods with a patience that borders on the heroic, guiding the ship of state through the turbulent waters of 18th-century European politics, while remaining the power behind the throne. The ultimate proof of the king's trust comes when he begins his frequent journeys back to his beloved Hanover. During these long absences, he appoints Caroline as Guardian of the Kingdom of Great Britain. This is no honorary title. Caroline is the acting regent, presiding over the Privy Council and making critical decisions for the empire. She holds the Great Seal of the realm, wielding the full authority of the monarch. From her desk, she manages the complexities of trade, defense, and law, proving to the world that she is not only the intellectual heart of the monarchy, but its capable hand. As regent, Caroline faces her first true test: the simmering discontent of the Privy Council. While George II is away in Hanover, the Queen finds herself surrounded by ambitious men who doubt a woman's capacity for governance. She sits at the head of the heavy oak table, her presence commanding despite the skepticism in the room. Caroline does not merely listen, she interrogates policy, using her sharp intellect to navigate the treacherous waters of 18th-century bureaucracy. She understands that power is not just given, It is maintained through meticulous attention to detail and a refusal to be intimidated by the political elite of London. In the quiet hours of the night, Caroline pores over state papers that many would find tedious. Her focus is on the national debt and the complex web of trade agreements that sustain the empire. Unlike her predecessors, she treats the treasury as a puzzle to be solved rather than a source of personal wealth. The scratching of her quill on parchment is the only sound in the royal study. She writes detailed instructions to Sir Robert Walpole, her primary political ally, ensuring that even in the king's absence, the machinery of the British government continues to grind forward with unprecedented efficiency and foresight. Caroline's regency is marked by a unique blend of politics and philosophy. She continues her secret correspondence with the great minds of Europe, including the philosopher Leibniz. To her, statecraft is an extension of the Enlightenment. She believes that a well-ordered kingdom must be led by a well-ordered mind. In the gardens of Richmond Lodge, she walks with thinkers and scientists, discussing the nature of the universe while simultaneously deciding the fate of parliamentary bills. Her ability to bridge the gap between abstract thought and practical rule becomes the hallmark of her time as the guardian of the kingdom. The Jacobite threat remains a constant shadow over the Hanoverian throne. During her regency, Caroline receives reports of secret meetings and whispers of rebellion in the north. She handles these threats not with brute force, but with a sophisticated intelligence network. She reads intercepted letters by candlelight, her eyes scanning for codes and hidden names. She understands that the stability of the crown depends on her ability to anticipate dissent before it catches fire. Her composure never wavers, even as her spies bring news of plots aimed directly at the heart of the monarchy she is sworn to protect. While the king is absent, Caroline must also manage the delicate optics of the royal court. She hosts receptions that are both grand and strategically modest, projecting an image of Hanoverian stability. Every guest is observed. Every conversation is a piece of data for her political engine. She uses these social gatherings to subtly influence the wives of powerful lords, knowing that the domestic sphere is often where the real political deals are struck. Her smile is a mask of diplomatic grace, hiding a mind that is constantly calculating the loyalty and worth of everyone who bows before her throne. Religion is a battlefield in 18th-century Britain, and Caroline is a master of the middle ground. As regent, she oversees the appointment of bishops, favoring those who lean toward the rationalism of the Enlightenment rather than religious extremism. She navigates the complex tensions between the High Church and the dissenters with a steady hand. In her private chapel, she reflects on the role of faith in a modern state, concluding that a stable throne requires a tolerant but controlled religious landscape. Her decisions here will shape the character of the Church of England for generations, steering it toward the intellectual moderation she so values. One of Caroline's most enduring legacies begins with a bold medical gamble. Smallpox is a scourge that ravages Europe, and the Queen is determined to protect her children. Influenced by Lady Mary Wortley Montagu's accounts of variolation in the Ottoman Empire, Caroline pushes for the procedure to be tested in England. She faces immense backlash from the medical establishment and the clergy, who view the practice as unnatural. Undeterred, she orders the inoculation of prisoners and orphans as a trial, demonstrating a cold, scientific pragmatism that prioritizes the long-term health of the realm over traditionalist fears and superstitions. The success of the smallpox inoculations on the royal children cements Caroline's reputation as a visionary leader. By risking the lives of her own heirs to prove the validity of science, she earns the grudging respect of the public. This act is more than a maternal precaution. It is a statement of Enlightenment values. She has used her regency to advance human knowledge, moving Britain closer to a future defined by reason rather than fate. The Queen becomes a patron of the Royal Society, further integrating the crown with the burgeoning scientific revolution that will eventually transform the world. However, the Queen's political success is mirrored by a growing rift within her own family. Her eldest son, Frederick, the Prince of Wales, feels sidelined by his mother's power and his father's absence. The tension between the regent and the heir to the throne becomes a public scandal, as Frederick begins to gather his own rival court of disgruntled politicians. Caroline manages this domestic insurgency with the same ruthlessness she applies to her enemies. She sees Frederick's behavior not just as a family matter, but as a threat to the stability of the Hanoverian line, leading to a bitter and cold estrangement. As the news of George II's impending return from Hanover reaches London, Caroline prepares to relinquish her formal titles as guardian of the kingdom. Her regency has been a period of remarkable stability and intellectual growth for Britain. She has balanced the budget, suppressed dissent, and championed scientific progress. When the king finally arrives at the docks of the Thames, he finds his kingdom more secure than he left it. Caroline greets him not just as a devoted wife, but as a seasoned ruler who has proven that the mind of the Queen is the true engine of the British monarchy. With the king back on English soil, the formal banners of the regency are furled. But Caroline's influence remains as potent as ever. George II, while outwardly the master of the realm, finds himself increasingly reliant on his wife's quiet counsel. In the flickering candlelight of her private chambers, Caroline reviews the state papers she managed during his absence. She is no longer just the queen consort. She is the architect of the Hanoverian peace. The transition from acting ruler back to the king's companion is a delicate dance of ego and intellect, one Caroline performs with unmatched grace. The return of the king also necessitates the long-delayed arrival of their eldest son, Frederick Louis, from Hanover. The Prince of Wales is a stranger to his parents, having been left behind for 14 years. His arrival at St. James's Palace is marked by a chilling formality rather than a warm reunion. Caroline watches her son with a mixture of intellectual curiosity and maternal apprehension. The political air grows thick with tension, as Frederick's desire for independence clashes with his father's authoritarian nature. The Queen realizes that managing her son will be her greatest challenge yet. The friction within the royal family becomes the talk of the court. But Caroline maintains a facade of perfect composure. She acts as the indispensable mediator between the volatile king and the resentful prince. While George rages in the foreground about his son's insolence, Caroline stands in the shadows, whispering the words that prevent a public scandal. She understands that the stability of the monarchy depends on a united front. In these moments, her political genius is most evident. She doesn't just manage the state, she manages the very temperaments of the men who think they rule it. Sir Robert Walpole remains Caroline's most trusted ally in the government. Their partnership is an intellectual marriage of minds that effectively bypasses the king's often erratic whims. In the secluded corners of the palace, they discuss the nuances of the South Sea debt and the shifting alliances of Europe. Walpole respects Caroline's grasp of economics and her ability to neutralize his enemies with a well-placed word in the king's ear. Together, they form a shadow government, a secret engine of British policy hidden behind the velvet curtains and candlelight of the Queen's inner sanctum. Caroline's vision for Britain extends to the very landscape of London. She turns her intellectual curiosity toward architecture and gardening, commissioning the creation of the Serpentine in Hyde Park. She envisions a space that combines the wildness of nature with the order of Enlightenment thought. As she reviews the blueprints, she sees more than just water and trees. She sees a monument to the Hanoverian era. This project is a physical manifestation of her desire to leave a lasting, enlightened mark on the kingdom, moving beyond the dusty halls of the palace and into the public eye. Even as her political duties mount, Caroline refuses to abandon her philosophical pursuits. She invites the theologian Samuel Clarke to the palace for late-night debates on the nature of space, time, and the soul. These discussions are the intellectual oxygen she craves. While the rest of the court sleeps, the queen and the scholar sit by a dying fire, dissecting the works of Newton and Leibniz. To Caroline, the pursuit of knowledge is a sacred duty, and her patronage of the greatest minds of the age cements her reputation as the most learned queen to ever sit upon the British throne. The year 1733 brings the excise crisis, a political firestorm that threatens Walpole's ministry and the king's popularity. Mobs fill the streets, protesting new taxes on wine and tobacco. Inside the palace, the atmosphere is grim. Caroline stands firmly by Walpole, urging the king not to dismiss him despite the public outcry. She understands that the excise bill is a necessary step for financial stability, even if the masses cannot see it. In the face of rioting and effigy burning, the queen remains a pillar of steel, her intellectual conviction guiding the monarchy through one of its most dangerous internal threats. Amidst the political turmoil, Caroline carries a heavy secret. For years, she has suffered from a painful umbilical rupture, an injury sustained during her final pregnancy. She conceals her agony from everyone, including the king, fearing that any sign of weakness would diminish her influence. She endures horrific medical treatments in secret, returning to the court with a smile and a sharp wit just moments after gasping in pain. Her resilience is not just physical, it is a manifestation of her iron will. The queen's body may be failing, but her mind remains the sovereign power of the court. Caroline's crowning intellectual achievement is her library at St. James's Palace, a sanctuary of thousands of volumes. It is here that she feels most at home, surrounded by the thoughts of the ages. She spends hours organizing her collection, which ranges from ancient Greek philosophy to contemporary scientific journals. The library is not just a room, it is a map of her mind. Even as the king's mistresses, like Henrietta Howard, occupy the court's gossip, Caroline remains unbothered. She knows that while the king may seek fleeting affection elsewhere, it is to her library and her intellect that he returns for guidance. By the mid-1730s, the balance of power in Britain is a finely tuned machine, with Caroline at the controls. She has successfully navigated family scandals, political uprisings, and her own failing health to maintain a period of unprecedented stability. The king, Walpole, and the queen form a triumvirate that defines the age. As she looks out over the gardens she designed, Caroline reflects on the nature of power. It is not found in the crown or the scepter, but in the ability to foresee the future and shape it. The queen consort has become the true guardian of the British Enlightenment. By 1736, the weight of the crown begins to manifest physically. Caroline suffers in silence from a long-concealed umbilical hernia, a secret kept even from her physicians to prevent any perception of weakness. In the quiet of her private dressing room, the queen endures agonizing pain while her attendants prepare her for the day's public audience. She views her body as a mere vessel for the state's stability. To falter now would be to invite chaos within the court and embolden her political enemies. She masks her suffering with a practiced smile, a master of self-discipline in an age of excess. King George II departs for Hanover once more, leaving Caroline as Queen Regent. This period of sole rule is when her political genius truly shines. She manages the Privy Council with a firm hand, her intelligence and wit keeping the ambitious ministers in check. However, her eldest son, Frederick, the Prince of Wales, grows increasingly resentful of his mother's authority. The palace hallways are thick with intrigue as factions form between the Queen's loyalists and the prince's supporters. Caroline remains unfazed, using her intellectual prowess to outmaneuver the internal threats to the Hanoverian succession. The peace of the Regency is shattered by the Porteous riots in Edinburgh. A mob lynches a captain of the city guard, defying royal authority. In London, Caroline is outraged. She views the uprising not just as a local disturbance, but as a direct challenge to the Enlightenment values of law and order she has championed. She demands a swift and decisive response, working late into the night with Robert Walpole to draft the government's reaction. The Queen's resolve is ironclad. She will not allow the fringes of the kingdom to descend into the lawless anarchy of the past. Winter 1736 brings a terrifying crisis. The king, attempting to return from Hanover, is caught in a violent storm at sea. For days, no word reaches London, and the city is gripped by rumors of his death. Caroline maintains a public facade of calm, attending the opera and holding court as if nothing is amiss. Behind closed doors, however, she keeps a lonely vigil, watching the weather vanes from the palace windows. The tension is palpable. The death of the king would thrust her into a bitter regency battle with her son, Frederick, and potentially undo decades of work. The king eventually returns, but family relations reach a breaking point. When the Prince of Wales's wife, Augusta, goes into labor, Frederick spirits her away from Hampton Court in the middle of the night to avoid Caroline's presence at the birth. This public snub is a declaration of war. Caroline is deeply hurt, but remains strategically cold. She realizes that the rift with her son is now permanent and irreconcilable. The Queen's role as the family's mediator has failed, and she turns her focus entirely toward the preservation of the state over the restoration of her domestic peace. Seeking solace from the toxic atmosphere of the court, Caroline pours her energy into her intellectual retreats. She commissions the Hermitage and Merlin's Cave in Richmond Gardens, structures filled with busts of great thinkers like Newton and Boyle. These are not mere follies, but temples to the British Enlightenment. Here, she discusses philosophy and science away from the prying eyes of the nobility. These gardens represent her vision for the future, a world governed by reason and knowledge rather than the archaic, bloody traditions of the past. Even as her health fails, her mind remains a beacon of progress. November 1737 brings the end of Caroline's endurance. During a public event, she collapses, the hidden hernia finally becoming fatal. The court is thrown into a state of shock as the Queen is carried to her bedchamber. The gravity of her condition can no longer be concealed. As the news spreads, the atmosphere in the palace turns somber and hushed. The intellectual heart of the monarchy is failing. Even her fiercest critics among the clergy and the opposition realize that an era is drawing to a close. The Queen, however, remains composed, preparing for the final transition. On her deathbed, the Queen's secret is revealed to the king and the physicians. The surgery of the 18th century is brutal and offers no hope. Despite her immense suffering, Caroline's thoughts remain on her husband and the nation. In a famous, heartbreaking exchange, George II weeps by her side. When she urges him to remarry after her death, he famously sobs that he will only have mistresses. Even in her final hours, Caroline manages the king's emotions, ensuring he feels supported as she prepares to leave him to rule without his most trusted advisor. Robert Walpole stands outside the Queen's chambers, realizing his own political future is dying with her. Without Caroline to manage the king's temper and interpret his moods, Walpole's influence will inevitably wane. The triumvirate that has ruled Britain for over a decade is disintegrating. He reflects on their long partnership, how her intellect had balanced his pragmatism. The hallways of St. James's Palace feel colder and darker. The Queen was the glue that held the Hanoverian interest together, and her absence will leave a void that no minister or mistress can ever hope to fill. On November 20th, 1737, Queen Caroline of Ansbach breathes her last. The nation is plunged into genuine mourning for a woman who was more than just a consort. She was a patron of the arts, a defender of science, and the silent architect of British stability. As her funeral procession prepares to move through the streets of London, the legacy of the intellectual queen begins to take shape. She had successfully navigated the treacherous waters of the early Hanoverian court, leaving behind a kingdom that was more enlightened and more secure than the one she had found. The funeral procession of Queen Caroline moves through the damp, fog-choked streets of London. Black banners drape from every balcony, and the tolling of church bells creates a heavy, rhythmic pulse through the city. Despite the icy November chill, thousands of citizens stand in solemn silence, their heads bowed in genuine reverence for the woman who governed them with such intellectual grace. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. This is not merely a state ceremony. It is a collective mourning for a queen who bridged the gap between the crown and the common people through her wisdom and patronage. In the private chambers of St. James's Palace, King George II is a man undone. The stoic, often temperamental monarch sits by a dying fire, his face etched with a grief that transcends royal protocol. He refuses to see his ministers, his mind fixated on the void Caroline has left behind. In a rare moment of profound vulnerability, he issues a specific and unusual command for his own future. When his time comes, the side of his coffin must be removed, alongside hers, so that their dust might eventually mingle. Even in death, he cannot bear to be truly separated from the only person who understood the weight of his crown. The burial takes place within the hallowed cold stone of Westminster Abbey. Under the flickering light of countless candles, Caroline is lowered into a specially constructed vault. This chamber was designed with a specific intent, reflecting her pragmatic and enduring bond with her husband. The sound of the choir echoes against the high Gothic arches, their voices haunting and ethereal. As the stone slab is moved into place, the legacy of the philosopher queen is physically sealed within the heart of British history. The ceremony is devoid of the usual courtly vanity, replaced by a profound, heavy sense of loss that permeates the ancient abbey. Sir Robert Walpole stands alone in his study, staring at a stack of state papers that seem suddenly insurmountable. For years, Caroline was his secret weapon, the intellectual force that smoothed his path with the king and tempered the monarch's volatile impulses. Without her mediation, the political landscape shifts beneath his feet. The shadows in the room seem longer, the silence heavier. Walpole realizes that the era of stability he and the Queen built is now under threat. The intellectual Queen was the linchpin of the Hanoverian administration, and her absence leaves a void that no minister can hope to fill. In the silent halls of the Royal Society, the scientific community feels the loss of their most powerful advocate. Caroline had been the patron who understood the importance of the Enlightenment, corresponding with the greatest minds of her age. She had championed smallpox inoculation and supported the work of astronomers and mathematicians. Now, her empty chair at scientific demonstrations serves as a poignant reminder of her unique role. The scholars gather in hushed groups, discussing her legacy, She was not just a spectator of progress. She was a participant who brought the light of reason into the darkened corridors of the royal court. The Winter Gardens at Richmond and Kew stand as a living testament to Caroline's vision. Even in the bleakness of late November, the structured paths and the hermitage she commissioned reflect her love for the balance between nature and philosophy. These gardens were more than just royal retreats. They were spaces designed for intellectual contemplation, where she once walked with poets and thinkers. As the frost settles on the stone busts of the great philosophers she admired, the landscape she shaped continues to tell her story. Her influence on the British landscape was as profound as her influence on its politics, blending beauty with intellectual rigor. Among the women of the court and the rising intellectual circles known as the Bluestockings, Caroline becomes a posthumous icon. They pore over her letters and recount her debates with Samuel Clarke and Leibniz. To them, she was proof that a woman could hold the highest position of influence through sheer intellect and political acumen. In quiet drawing rooms lit by candlelight, her words are kept alive. She had set a precedent for the educated woman in public life, a model of the philosopher queen that would inspire generations of female thinkers to claim their place in the burgeoning British Enlightenment. The relationship between the late Queen and her son, Frederick, Prince of Wales, remains a dark chapter of the Hanoverian legacy. Frederick, excluded from her deathbed, navigates a complex mixture of resentment and mourning. The rift in the royal family, which Caroline had tried to manage through political maneuvering, now stands as an open wound. In his own court at Leicester House, the prince contemplates his mother's shadow. He is the heir to a kingdom she helped solidify, yet he remains an outsider to her inner circle of trust. The fractured family dynamic serves as a stark contrast to the stability she brought to the nation. Historians and archivists begin the task of preserving the Queen's extensive correspondence. These letters, written in her elegant script, reveal the depth of her involvement in European diplomacy and her unwavering support for religious tolerance. The documents are more than just ink on paper. They are the blueprints of a modernized monarchy. As the quills scratch across parchment in the dim light of the archives, the true scale of her influence becomes clear. She was the silent architect of the Hanoverian success, a woman who understood that the survival of the crown depended on its ability to adapt to a changing, more rational world. As the year 1737 draws to a close, the Hanoverian dynasty stands more secure than ever before, a direct result of Caroline's life's work. Her death marks the end of an era, but her intellectual and political fingerprints are everywhere. From the stability of the Parliament to the flourishing of the sciences, the kingdom is transformed. The Queen Consort, who was once a foreign princess from Ansbach, has become the defining spirit of an age. The torch of the Enlightenment, which she carried so boldly, now passes to a nation she helped lead out of the shadows and into a new, reasoned future. The death of Queen Caroline in November 1737 leaves the British court in a state of profound, hollow silence. King George II, often perceived as a man of rigid routine and short temper, is utterly shattered by the loss of the only person who truly understood the complexities of his crown. He retreats into the private apartments of St. James's Palace, refusing to let the light of day touch his grief. The Queen's absence is not merely a domestic void, it is a structural failure in the machinery of the state. Without her mediating hand, the king's relationship with his ministers and his estranged son begins to fray into bitter, unshielded resentment. The funeral procession to Westminster Abbey is a somber affair, conducted under the veil of a cold, drizzling night. The streets of London are lined with silent onlookers, many of whom recognize that the intellectual heart of the monarchy has ceased to beat. As her coffin is lowered into the Henry VII chapel, it is placed beside the space reserved for the king, ensuring they will remain together in the stone silence of history. The air in the abbey is thick with the scent of incense and damp wool, a heavy atmosphere that reflects the nation's uncertainty. The political stability she anchored now feels precariously tethered to her memory. In the weeks following her interment, the Queen's private library becomes a ghost-filled sanctuary of her intellect. Robert Walpole, the Prime Minister who owed so much of his longevity to her patronage, walks through the quiet aisles of books. He sees the volumes of philosophy, the scientific treatises by Newton and Leibniz, and the theological debates she so loved to mediate. He realizes that Caroline was the bridge between the old world of divine right and the new world of reasoned governance. Without her, Walpole is left to face a volatile parliament and a grieving king alone, armed only with the memories of her counsel. While the court mourns, the seeds of the Enlightenment that Caroline carefully tended begin to sprout across the kingdom. Her patronage of the sciences and the arts has created an ecosystem where intellect is valued as much as lineage. In the coffee houses of London, thinkers discuss the Queen's legacy, noting how she protected religious dissenters and encouraged the translation of foreign texts. Her influence has moved beyond the palace walls and into the public sphere, fueling a burgeoning middle class hungry for knowledge. The Queen may be gone, but the intellectual curiosity she championed has become a permanent fixture of British society. The tension between the king and his son, Frederick, Prince of Wales, reaches a new level of coldness without Caroline's intervention. Frederick, feeling liberated from his mother's formidable shadow but also deprived of her guidance, begins to cultivate his own court at Leicester House. He seeks to frame himself as a patriot king, a concept Caroline herself had often discussed, yet he lacks her nuanced understanding of power. The shadow of the late Queen looms over every political move he makes. Even in death, her standards of intellectual and political conduct remain the benchmark by which the Hanoverian princes are judged by the public. In the royal gardens she helped design, such as those at Richmond and Kew, the plants she imported from around the globe continue to grow. These gardens are living monuments to her belief in the order of nature and the importance of botanical science. Even in winter, the structured paths and the hermitage she built reflect her fascination with the balance between the wild and the rational. Naturalists and scholars continue to visit these grounds, seeing them not just as royal retreats, but as outdoor laboratories for the study of the natural world, a testament to her enduring role as a patron of the burgeoning scientific revolution. Across the English Channel, the intellectuals of Europe take note of the Queen's passing. From the salons of Paris to the courts of Germany, Caroline is remembered as the philosopher queen. Her correspondence with the greatest minds of the age is archived and studied, ensuring her philosophical contributions are not lost to time. She had successfully navigated the treacherous waters of religious conflict and dynastic instability, proving that a woman's intellect could be the stabilizing force of a major European power. Her life becomes a blueprint for later Enlightenment monarchs who seek to rule with reason rather than mere tradition. As the mid-18th century approaches, the stability Caroline helped forge allows Britain to weather the storm of the 1745 Jacobite Rising. While her husband and son struggle with the immediate military threats, the institutional strength she bolstered, the bank, the parliament, and the Protestant succession, holds firm. The people of Britain, though divided in many ways, find a common identity in the Enlightenment values that Caroline personified. Her long-term vision of a modern, rational state begins to outshine the old romantic notions of the Stuart past. The Queen Consort's ghost is seen in the very resilience of the kingdom she loved. The young George III, Caroline's grandson, is raised in an environment saturated with her influence. His tutors speak of her discipline, her love of learning, and her devotion to the duties of the crown. The Queen's House, which would later become Buckingham Palace, stands as a symbol of the domestic and intellectual life she prioritized. As the boy learns the history of his house, Caroline is presented not just as a grandmother, but as the architect of the modern Hanoverian identity. The lessons of her life, pragmatism, patronage, and the pursuit of knowledge, become the foundation of his own long and complex reign. Ultimately, the story of Caroline of Ansbach is the story of how a foreign princess transformed herself into the intellectual heart of a global power. Her legacy is found not in monuments of gold, but in the libraries, the scientific societies, and the stable constitutional framework of the United Kingdom. She bridged the gap between the medieval and the modern, proving that the mind is the most powerful tool of any monarch. As the Enlightenment reaches its zenith, the shadow of the Queen from Ansbach remains a guiding light, a silent partner in the triumph of reason over the darkness of the past. To understand the architect of Britain's Enlightenment, we must look back to the courts of Germany. Young Caroline of Ansbach was not merely a royal ward, she was the protégée of Sophia Charlotte of Prussia. In the flickering candlelight of Berlin's libraries, Caroline was shaped by the sharpest minds of the era, including the philosopher Leibniz. These early years forged a mind that saw the world not as a collection of territories to be ruled by divine right, but as a complex puzzle of natural laws and human reason. She emerged from her youth not as a passive princess, but as a formidable intellectual powerhouse. In 1705, Caroline made a choice that would define the religious and political landscape of Europe. Offered the hand of the future Holy Roman Emperor, Archduke Charles, she faced a condition: she must convert to Catholicism. In an age where crowns were traded for convenience, Caroline refused. She would not sacrifice her intellectual or religious convictions for an imperial title. This act of defiance caught the attention of the House of Hanover. It was this steadfast commitment to her principles that paved the way for her marriage to George Augustus, ensuring that Britain's future queen would be a champion of the Protestant succession. Upon arriving in London, Caroline entered a court fractured by dynastic tension and cultural shifts. The Hanoverians were seen as outsiders, yet Caroline navigated the treacherous waters of St. James's Palace with a grace that masked her sharp political acumen. She recognized that to secure the throne, the family needed to win the hearts of the English people. While George I and his son, her husband, engaged in bitter public feuds, Caroline acted as the invisible bridge. She began hosting salons where the English elite could mingle with foreign intellectuals, slowly weaving the Hanoverian line into the very fabric of British social and cultural life. Caroline's relationship with her husband, George II, was the most complex political partnership of the 18th century. Though he was a man of military temperament and often stubborn pride, he deeply relied on her intellect. Behind the closed doors of their private apartments, it was Caroline who translated the complexities of British law and parliamentary procedure for him. She allowed him the public glory of the crown, while she meticulously managed the gears of state. Their partnership was a delicate dance of ego and influence, where the Queen's whisper often held more weight than the King's public proclamations. Nowhere was Caroline's influence more profound than in her alliance with Robert Walpole, Britain's first Prime Minister. Together, they formed an unofficial triumvirate with the King. Walpole recognized in Caroline a political strategist of his own caliber. They communicated through a series of coded messages and clandestine meetings, ensuring that the King's policies aligned with the stability of the nation. This secret cooperation was the glue that held the early Hanoverian government together. In this dark, cinematic era of British history, Caroline was the silent architect of a new kind of constitutional monarchy, one that favored trade and peace over dynastic war. The Queen's devotion to the Enlightenment was not merely theoretical, it was life-saving. In 1721, when smallpox ravaged London, Caroline took a radical step that horrified the traditionalists of her court. Having learned of the Turkish practice of inoculation, she insisted that her own children be treated. To prove its safety, she first tested the procedure on condemned prisoners and orphans, a harsh reality of the time. Her gamble paid off, and her public endorsement of inoculation transformed medical history. She used her body and her family as a laboratory for progress, signaling the end of an era ruled by superstition and the beginning of one governed by science. While George II frequently returned to his beloved Hanover, Caroline was left to rule as Queen Regent. These periods were not mere placeholders, they were masterclasses in governance. She managed the volatile South Sea Company crisis and kept the Jacobite threats at bay through a network of loyal informants. Her regency proved that a woman could hold the reins of a global power with a steady hand. She moved through the corridors of power not as a temporary substitute, but as a sovereign in her own right, her presence commanding respect from even the most cynical members of the Privy Council. Despite her public triumphs, Caroline lived with a painful secret. For years, she suffered from an umbilical rupture sustained during her final pregnancy. In a display of terrifying stoicism, she hid her agony from the court, and even from the king, fearing that any sign of weakness would undermine her political influence. She continued to stand for hours at court ceremonies, her face a mask of serene composure while she bled beneath her silk corsets. This hidden struggle reveals the true cost of her power. She was a woman who sacrificed her physical well-being to maintain the stability of the crown and the Enlightenment ideals she championed. In November 1737, the secret could no longer be kept. As the Queen lay on her deathbed, the court was plunged into a state of genuine mourning. Even George II, known for his brusque demeanor, was inconsolable, refusing to leave her side. In her final hours, Caroline remained the intellectual center of the room, discussing the future of the kingdom and the education of her grandchildren. She famously urged the king to remarry, to which he sobbed he would only have mistresses. Even in death, her sharp wit and her focus on the continuity of the state remained unbroken, marking the end of a remarkable intellectual reign. The passing of Caroline of Ansbach left a void that the British court would struggle to fill for generations. She was more than a queen consort. She was the intellectual heart of the early Georgian era. Her legacy lived on in the libraries she expanded, the scientists she patronized, and the stable political system she helped Walpole to build. As her funeral procession moved through the gray, rain-soaked streets of London, the nation realized it had lost its most sophisticated mind. The shadow of the Queen from Ansbach would forever remain a guiding light, the silent partner in the ultimate triumph of reason over the darkness of the past. The departure of Caroline was not merely a royal mourning, but the closing of a chapter on the British Enlightenment's most potent advocate. In the months following her death, the halls of St. James's Palace felt colder, stripped of the vibrant debates that once echoed within her private chambers. Her influence survived in the ink-stained manuscripts of philosophers and the meticulous calculations of royal astronomers. Though her physical form was gone, the intellectual structure she helped erect, a synthesis of power and reason, stood firm. The court began to understand that her true monument was not in stone, but in the progress of the mind. Caroline's library, a sanctuary of leather-bound wisdom, became a silent testament to her curiosity. Here, works of theology sat beside revolutionary texts on physics and botany. The dust motes dancing in the dim afternoon light seemed to settle on the very thoughts she had cherished. Scholars who had once been granted her audience now looked upon her empty desk with a sense of profound loss. She had been the bridge between the crown and the academy, a woman who understood that the survival of a dynasty depended as much on the expansion of knowledge as on the strength of the military. Sir Robert Walpole, the architect of Britain's political stability, found himself adrift without his most trusted advisor. They had been an unlikely duo, the pragmatist and the philosopher, united by a vision of a secure Hanoverian succession. In the secluded corners of the treasury, Walpole pored over old correspondence, the Queen's elegant handwriting a sharp contrast to the chaotic demands of the state. He knew that without her mediation, the King's temper would be harder to manage, and the delicate balance of power more difficult to maintain. The Queen's absence was a physical ache in the machinery of government. George II, often viewed as a man of military bluntness and frequent irritation, was hollowed by the loss of his wife. His grief was private but pervasive. He frequently visited her apartments, surrounded by her personal effects, seeking a comfort that no courtier could provide. Despite his notorious temper and his dalliances, Caroline had been his anchor, the only person he truly trusted and respected. He ordered that her image be preserved in various portraits, yet none could capture the sharp intelligence of her eyes. The crown felt heavier on his head, a burden no longer shared with a partner of equal intellect. The seeds Caroline had planted in the soil of British science continued to sprout. Her patronage of the smallpox inoculation had changed medical history, and her support for the Royal Society ensured that London remained the center of the scientific world. In the quiet observatories and anatomy theaters, her name was whispered with reverence. She had seen the future, a world where reason triumphed over superstition. This intellectual legacy was her gift to the nation, a silent revolution that moved forward even as the memory of her funeral faded into the gray mists of London's history. Princesses Anne, Amelia, and Caroline, the daughters who had watched their mother command the intellects of Europe, struggled to find their own paths in a world without her guidance. She had insisted on an education that rivaled any prince's, teaching them that a woman's mind was her greatest weapon. In the palace schoolrooms, the ghost of her instruction remained. They studied the maps of the empire and the treatises of the Enlightenment, knowing they were the living extensions of her ambition. The Queen had raised them to be more than just diplomatic pawns. She had raised them to be thinkers. Across the English Channel, the news of Caroline's death resonated in the courts of Europe and the studies of great thinkers. Men like Leibniz, whom she had once patronized and corresponded with, saw her as the ideal Enlightenment monarch. Her letters, which spanned decades and covered topics from metaphysics to garden design, were now treasured as relics of a superior mind. The correspondence revealed a woman who never stopped questioning the nature of the universe. In her writing, the barriers of status and gender fell away, replaced by a pure, unadulterated pursuit of truth that transcended her royal title. The political stability of the House of Hanover faced new threats as the rift between George II and his son Frederick, Prince of Wales, widened without Caroline's intervention. She had been the only one capable of softening the king's harshness and tempering the prince's rebellion. The court split into factions, and the shadows of intrigue grew longer in the corridors of power. Without her guiding hand, the family dynamic became a microcosm of the political strife she had spent her life trying to prevent. The Queen of Reason was no longer there to hold the fractured family together. Caroline's love for the natural world was immortalized in the parks and gardens of London. she had overseen the creation of the Serpentine in Hyde Park, turning wild land into a place of structured beauty. Even in her absence, the landscape she shaped provided a lungs for the growing city. At twilight, the water reflected the somber sky, a mirror to the quiet elegance she had brought to the English court. These public spaces were her most enduring physical legacy, a reminder that her vision of order and beauty extended far beyond the walls of the palace and into the lives of the people. As the decades passed, the memory of Caroline of Ansbach transitioned from lived experience to historical legend. She remained the standard by which future queen consorts were measured, intellectually formidable, politically astute, and deeply committed to the progress of society. She had bridged the gap between the old world of absolute monarchs and the new world of constitutional governance and scientific inquiry. Her life was a testament to the power of a single mind to influence the trajectory of a nation. Caroline was not just a queen of Britain, she was a pioneer of the modern era. Kensington Gardens stands as a silent witness to the intellect of Caroline of Ansbach. It was here that she orchestrated the transformation of the royal grounds, turning a rugged wilderness into a bastion of Enlightenment design. The creation of the Serpentine was not merely an aesthetic choice, but a statement of her command over the natural world through engineering. As the sun sets over the water, one can almost see the shadow of the Queen walking with her advisors, discussing the future of the nation. Her legacy is etched into the very soil of the capital, a testament to a mind that sought harmony between nature and reason. In the quiet corridors of the Royal Library, Caroline's intellectual hunger remains palpable. She was a voracious reader who collected works that challenged the status quo, from radical theological treatises to the latest scientific discoveries. Her library was not a mere display of wealth, but a laboratory of thought where she engaged with the greatest minds of her age through their written words. These volumes, many of which still bear the marks of her study, served as the foundation for a court that valued logic over superstition. She understood that a sovereign's greatest weapon was not the sword, but an informed and critical mind. The famous correspondence between Leibniz and Clarke, moderated by Caroline, remains a pinnacle of philosophical history. She acted as more than a mere spectator. She was the catalyst for a debate that defined the boundaries of space, time, and the nature of God. Through her letters, she forced the greatest thinkers of Europe to refine their arguments, bridging the gap between German metaphysics and British empiricism. This intellectual exchange solidified her reputation as the philosopher queen. Her ability to navigate such complex terrain ensured that the Hanoverian court was seen as the intellectual center of the Western world, a beacon of progress in a changing era. Caroline's influence extended deep into the Royal Society, where she championed the works of Isaac Newton. She recognized that the future of Britain lay in its scientific advancement and global exploration. By providing royal patronage to innovators, she ensured that the crown was directly linked to the burgeoning Industrial Revolution. Her support was not just financial, it was a public endorsement of the scientific method over blind tradition. This partnership between the monarchy and the academy created a culture of inquiry that would eventually propel Britain to the forefront of the modern world. She was the bridge between the mystical past and a rational future. The political stability of the early Hanoverian reign was largely due to Caroline's subtle management of Robert Walpole. Together, they formed a triumvirate with the king that successfully navigated the treacherous waters of parliamentary politics and Jacobite threats. Caroline understood the delicate balance of power, often acting as the soft voice of reason that tempered George II's more impulsive tendencies. Her ability to operate behind the scenes allowed her to exercise significant authority without threatening the masculine structures of the time. She redefined the role of queen consort, moving it from a ceremonial position to one of active, strategic partnership in the governance of the realm. Perhaps her most enduring legacy was her courageous promotion of the smallpox inoculation. By choosing to inoculate her own children, she used the royal family as a public test case for a controversial new medical procedure. This act of maternal and intellectual bravery saved countless lives and signaled the beginning of public health initiatives in Britain. She faced immense criticism from both the church and the medical establishment, yet she remained steadfast in her belief in empirical evidence. Her commitment to science over fear demonstrated a modern sensibility that was far ahead of her time, cementing her status as a protector of her people's well-being. Caroline was a tireless patron of the arts, most notably the composer George Friedrich Handel. She understood that music and culture were the soul of a nation and used her influence to foster a vibrant artistic community in London. Handel's grand compositions often reflected the dignity and intellectual depth that Caroline brought to the court. Their friendship was based on a mutual respect for genius and a shared desire to elevate the cultural standing of the British monarchy. Through her support, the arts flourished, leaving a rich tapestry of sound and vision that continues to define the Georgian era as a period of unparalleled cultural sophistication. As her life drew to a close, Caroline's thoughts remained on the future of the dynasty and the education of her grandson, the future George III. She instilled in him the values of duty, intellectual rigor, and the importance of understanding the constitutional limits of the crown. Her influence ensured that the next generation of Hanoverians would be better prepared for the complexities of a rapidly changing world. She was the architect of a new kind of royalty, one that was engaged, educated, and deeply connected to the progress of the Enlightenment. Her presence was felt in every lesson taught and every policy debated long after she was gone. Today, the marble busts and portraits of Caroline of Ansbach serve as silent sentinels in the great halls of British history. They capture a woman of intense focus and quiet strength, a queen who preferred the company of philosophers to the frivolity of the court. Historians look back at her reign as a pivotal moment when the British monarchy began its slow transformation into a modern institution. She remains a symbol of the philosopher queen, a reminder that true power lies in the synthesis of authority and intellect. Her story is a testament to how one woman's vision can shape the destiny of an empire and the progress of human thought. The sun sets on the era of Caroline of Ansbach, but her light never truly faded. She left behind a nation that was more rational, more scientific, and more stable than the one she found. Her life's work was the bridge across which Britain walked into the modern age. As we look back on the century she helped define, we see the blueprint of the modern queen, a leader who is both a symbol of tradition and a champion of progress. Caroline of Ansbach, the intellectual queen consort, remains a towering figure of the Enlightenment, her mind an eternal flame in the long history of the British crown.